The cell. The first appearance of so-called organic life. This explanation that I'm going to do right now, a lot of times I can go into this for a couple of hours. I'm going to try to do the abbreviated version of it. The first cells that appeared on planet Earth appeared in water. And it makes itself distinct because of the membrane. Now, the membrane is a functioning unconsciousness. And it has certain qualities that are very important to understand, for our purpose especially. A membrane is semi-permeable. Semi-permeable membrane. So it's possible to move through that membrane. And the membrane has selective permeability. So it can select what it allows in, and it can create a barrier to things that it doesn't want, if it's a healthy cell. So selective permeability. And within the cell membrane, undefined, are all the senses that we eventually develop individual faculties for. The cell has primitive sight, hearing, taste, touch. All contained in there. So if the cell membrane comes in contact with something, it reacts. That means it has a sense of touch. If it comes in contact with light, it will react. Sound will make it react. And the selective permeability is its sense of taste, because it comes in contact with something and then decides, does it want to let it come into its inner environment and synthesize or metabolize that and then use that to recreate itself. So it's really important to understand that the first form of life had this membrane, and the membrane had a certain qualities to it. Then inside this membrane, there's protoplasm. I'm reaching back now into 9th grade biology, I think. And then we have another membrane, which is called the nuclear membrane. And inside the nuclear membrane, there we have the sacred helix, the DNA. Only really identified in 1950. So not that long ago, scientists discovered that there was this code structure that informed the whole cell about what it was going to do and how it was going to survive, but also how it was going to reproduce. So DNA. Inside the nuclear membrane is also another kind of nucleoplasm. So plasmic, is a very important quality of the cell. Nuclear plasm, protoplasm. And beyond the nuclear membrane, and then inside the outer membrane, there are different organelles, and they have different functions, like the mitochondria. The mitochondria takes substances and it metabolizes them and changes into energy. And another thing that's in this outer part of the nuclear membrane is the RNA. And a lot of times it's thought that the RNA, and there's a lot of those, is transmitting information about what's happening in the cytoplasm, that's what this layer is called, cytoplasm, through the nuclear membrane and informing the DNA. So it's like a chain. And the RNA, by the way, is very important, is very affected by the chemical content of what the cell's taking in, which immediately means nutrition. Just a side point. So this cell reproduces, and over time, through what's called evolution, multi-cell organisms started to appear. And it's all within what's called the ancient ocean, when water completely surrounded the earth. Now that's a big story right there. I'm not going to go into that, although I could. And this phase, from the appearance of the single cell to the time when land emerged on the earth, is about 2.8 billion years. And we went from invertebrates to vertebrates, and then there was like kind of this cataclysmic eruption, and now there was land appearing and a transition of species between land and water, so we know those are amphibians. And now beings are developing in an oxygen world. So here is water, H2O, oxygen, and we have a number of phases. You have the amphibian phase. I think I have this written out in my light body book, or there is a book by Michio Kushi called Biological Evolution. But amphibian, reptile, mammal, primates, and humans. And what happens is that as each phase appears, the change is speeding up. It's called a logarithmic spiral of change. The human. So it seems like that's where we are now. Now, one interesting thing about evolution that they discovered is sometimes, and they're talking about millions of years, a species will come out that's new but less developed than one of the species that's already there. Just a side point, that it's kind of like the tide. It's pushing forward and then pulling back in terms of development. That could be happening with humans as well. Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, Homo sapien, and it could be that there's some, again, Cro-Magnon that are appearing around us. I don't know. However, as humans, we have consciousness. And we start to develop an energy body. An energy body is actually going around all of these species, but ours is now accelerating, like in this logarithmic change, becoming more developed faster. And this energy body is starting to influence what we see, what we think, and it's starting to change us chemically. It's starting to change our sensitivities. It's changing our values, how we interact with each other, depending on how fast it's expanding in each individual. So this water development was about 2.8 billion years, and all the development that happened since then took 0.4 billion years. So it's about a 7-to-1 ratio. And so now we're entering into another dimension, which is the dimension of vibration. Well, you could say for practical purpose, just that we have consciousness. We've acquired it. The ability to identify things, to create language, to communicate, precisely in language. The other thing that developed along this timeline, accelerating in development, were the body systems. So one of the first ones that you have is reproduction. And very closely with that is digestion of the cell. The single cell is digesting. It's taking in, metabolizing, and then excreting. And one of the key things that's coming in and out is oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. I think that's really important to notice that in organic life, the cell takes in oxygen, metabolizes. Well, oxygen is a catalyst, and then it eliminates carbon dioxide. We'll talk about that as the class goes on. What develops after digestion is circulation. So reproduction, digestion, circulation, all beginning in the water phase. And the reason is because as in a single cell can take in directly through its membrane, but as you have multi-cell organisms, some cells are not in direct contact with the environment, so that organism has to take in, distribute inside of itself. So to transport nutrition and oxygen, it develops kind of a system for that, which is circulatory system. And it is interesting that still in the human being that our circulatory system and the salt level of our blood, of our human blood, is still the same salinity as this ancient ocean. So the salinity level has gone much higher now, but we still maintain that same salinity ratio as in this water phase. Respiration becomes essential. It develops, becomes more complex as we come into the air environment, and also developing the whole time, but gradually becoming more complex, is the nervous system. You have the reptilian brain, the back brain. You have the side brain, the mammillary brain. And then starting with the primate, human, you have the frontal brain. This frontal brain and the whole cerebral cortex at a certain point just totally accelerated in its development about 2 million years ago, became much more complex. So the level of communication, thought process became much more complex at that time. And that brings me to an important point to notice. First of all, that this progression is gradually accelerating. And it's a consistent process where you have one system developing out of the one before to accommodate the needs of change that are going on in evolution. Respiration, air environment. Nervous system, the beginning of certain kinds of perception, but eventually thinking. But then you also have what appears to be certain leaps, certain moments where there's a quantum change, like when land came out. This was like a cataclysmic upheaval. But the same thing is when the neural net of the brain suddenly increased. It was just going along at this pace of development, and then suddenly, like time-lapse photography, it expanded out. We have evidence all around us if we stop and take a look. This process is continuing. And we can just ask ourselves, how? How is it continuing? How is the development of these systems continuing? How is the development of our brain continuing? How is the chemistry and the physicality of our body continuing in evolution? And we could ask ourselves, is it still accelerating and in this logarithmic pace? So that means the changes that are happening and the next changes that are coming are going to be coming faster and faster. You know, one indication of that may be something that we externalize. Take a look at technology. How fast technology is changing. And throughout time, technology has always been an externalization of ourself. Most recently, like the computer. The computer is like an externalization, a replication of certain functions that happen within our nervous system. So what I propose to you is that the next system is this outer body system. It's been there all along, like the respiratory system and circulatory system. We're kind of there because when particles go into the single cell, they still need to move throughout. That's like a circulation. Multicellular, then we have the circulatory to carry oxygen and particles and nutrition throughout the organism. Respiration, animals are taking in water and then extracting oxygen, but now it becomes a major function and the lung, the pulmonary level expands. Reptile brain to the back brain. The mammal now becomes much larger and the frontal expands. So the outer body system is an outgrowth. It's always been there. There's even vibrations around inanimate objects, you know, rocks, well, and also plants. There's a vibrational field there. But what's happened, like in this process, that this vibrational field and its complexity, just like the neural net, is suddenly expanding and becoming much more precise. And for what reason? Because it's carrying the entity, or what we call human being, into a vibrational plane. And most of us are already functioning in that plane, but oftentimes we don't notice it. And sometimes for our good, and oftentimes to a detriment. It's hurting us because we don't realize what we're doing. It's like putting the baby behind the car, or let's go further, let's say like a 5 or 6 year old, because they can go like this with the wheel. And we put them in there and off they go. It's not going to be a good result. And so if you're doing Tai Chi, yoga, meditation, chanting, you're stimulating this. You're catalyzing that change in the whole vibrational complex of this outer body. And you may not realize then that you're going down the highway here, you know, but you have no control over the vehicle. And that, going back to what I said in the beginning, that's one of the points. People that I have met, people I've worked with, and myself have experienced the kind of, I'll just say, negative effects of expanding, sensitizing, noticing, having more skills, but not knowing how to regulate them.